Hello again, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations and attacks that we come under today here in the 21st century, particularly with a focus on the media and how it plays on our minds and our hearts. Recently, we've been getting into some of the more internal struggles that might rise up within any person or any group of people, such that our internal cognitive capacities cause us to make errors in our thinking and ultimately cause harm to our relationships and really our lives. Tonight, I want to use the ideas that we've been discussing around appeals to authority and the kinds of thinking errors that go along with that issue to discuss something that I see to be an extremely problematic and pervasive type of behavior in people today. We have spoken about this in the past, but now that we've got a lot of other material to inform our thinking, it's really well worth taking some time to open up this topic again so that we can improve our understanding and forge some deeper connections across the various topics that we've been discussing here at Minds on Guard. Our culture, particularly within younger people and those who spend a great deal of time invested in social media or mainstream narratives, has become deeply toxic. The term for the part of the problem that I see that people have become is narcissistic. But I want to use another distinction regarding the levels and the kinds of narcissism that we see today. Among some other content creation channels that focus on culture and thought manipulation, such as Days of Noah, the phrase normative narcissism has been really useful in clarifying the kinds of behavior that I wish to discuss in this video and videos that are going to be coming up in the future. I really do encourage anyone that's watching this to go check out Days of Noah and his work. He really has been a major inspiration for this channel, and I deeply appreciate all that he has done over the years to shed light on some very real problems in the world, as well as his ability to track trends and changes among cultures. This topic of what he has termed normative narcissism has made its way into most, if not all, of mainstream media and even many alternative media spaces through a kind of covert facade that is consistent among really all narcissistic behavior. We should bear in mind that when thinking about this topic, at least for this video, that not all people who behave narcissistically can or should be clinically diagnosed as such. There are a specific set of traits and distinctions that are required for that to be the case, along with training and discernment. And I'll state that none of what follows in this particular video is meant to diagnose or claim that the mere presence of these behaviors is enough to paint a person as having some sort of disorder. Rather, that we should take this information and apply it to our own lives to test for areas where we are behaving narcissistically and make every effort to change things toward the good. As we will see, it could be one of the most important choices that we could make in order to preserve our mental and our spiritual freedom. In order to establish meaning for this discussion, we need to define our main term, that is normative narcissism. We can begin by breaking things down into two component terms. Normative, meaning of or relating to a norm or standard, and narcissism, meaning a personality disorder characterized by self-preoccupation, need for admiration, lack of empathy, and unconscious deficits in self-esteem. If we combine these two meanings, we can think about this term as a personality disorder that has become an accepted societal standard for people's behavior. Normativity is the phenomenon in human societies of designating some actions or outcomes as good, desirable, or permissible, and others as bad, undesirable, or impermissible. A norm in this sense means a standard for evaluating or making judgments about behavior or outcomes. When we think of this as it may be applied to narcissistic behavior in today's society, I believe that it's clear that the kinds of self-absorbed, self-aggrandizing, attention-seeking, and generally unempathetic ways in which people behave publicly, in the media and online, have really become accepted as good, desirable, and really often celebrated. Our entire political class is inundated with this kind of thing, and these kinds of behavior flaws are major drivers for how people gain notoriety and fame on all of the major social media platforms today. It has become so normal that there are now classes that you can take that are aimed at gaining a following online and building a career as a social media influencer. The only prerequisite for this is to think so highly of yourself that your mere presence is worth monetary compensation and widespread notoriety. Now, there are surveys that have shown that young people today desire more and more to become an influencer over many other what would be called more traditional careers of the past, which in past decades and societies have provided the kinds of goods and services which allowed our society to grow and become prosperous. Well, that should be cause for a great deal of concern at a societal level. This new norm sets an even more concerning stage for a massive amount of control to be exerted over everyone who falls into this kind of behavior. Narcissists are some of the most manipulative people there are, and it's due to this that they themselves are equally the most susceptible to manipulation through thought and behavior control tactics. This is played out by really capitalizing on their need for their continued access to various types of narcissistic supply and that dopamine spike that we talked about so many videos ago. The kinds of control mechanisms that we've been discussing really work to their greatest effect on anyone who is so unstable in the truth that they will lie to the world about anything and everything in order for them to make sure that people see them in the most favorable light possible. While the interpersonal and interrelational damage that is caused by narcissistic behavior is really truly horrible, it takes on a different level of danger when the evils that are perpetrated through a lifestyle of continual lying have become accepted as good at a mass scale. In our last video, we discussed how people can place themselves as the authority of truth and right ways of thinking rather than appealing to objective tests for truth value as is revealed through the reality in which we find ourselves. Basically, our capacity to lie to ourselves knows no bounds, and as such, we're able to concoct all manner of delusion and falsehood that, when adopted as truth, becomes incredibly destructive. While this can be thought of as a kind of appeal to authority fallacy in one context, it really does play out as narcissism in people and ultimately evil behavior. We will discuss this in further videos, but to introduce this idea of narcissism as evil, we need to consider the kinds of things that narcissists do in order to maintain their sense of self-worth and value in the world. Much of this mirrors what we discussed in the last video, particularly with respect to the idea that many of the worst kinds of thinking errors and behaviors can trace their roots to some kind of emotional reactivity that is based in fear. Barring some other disorder like psychopathy, people who behave narcissistically have this fear-based component operating at many, if not all, levels of their psychology. This fear may have legitimate causes such as childhood trauma, abusive parents, and other damaging effects and events early in life. But as people grow and develop, the fears grow right alongside and become a deep and subconscious need to be seen a certain way by the world around us. That is where many of the narcissists obtain their narcissistic supply and perpetuate the same kinds of behaviors. That usually takes the form of some self-created, idealized version of ourselves that we have decided at some level is ultimately worthy and deserving of love and valuable, such that we're able to feel secure in a world that is chaotic and has caused us harm at some level. The problem is, we make ourselves the judge of all these things and then force that self-imposed ideal onto the world. If people don't agree with who we think we are, then we're faced with the choice to either alter what we think about ourselves or double down and force our own ideals onto everyone around us. This exchange can and does take many forms, the worst of which being the perpetuation of the exact same kinds of evil and abuse which bred the behavior in any individual in the first place. Often we see that children of narcissistic parents grow up to pattern the same kinds of behavior, and the cycle of evil and lying persists. When people react from their fear of losing control of their self-image, there's no telling what kinds of attacks and damage that they will resort to inflicting in order to appear right and good. The damage this kind of thing does to a society is really difficult to articulate in full. I'm not sure that we've seen the full scope of what this looks like on the world stage, but one of the main reasons I want to discuss this phenomenon of the normalization of these kinds of lies is the potential for incredible levels of control to be forced onto the population of the world. What's taking shape with respect to a normalization of narcissistic behavior is that we are being directed and programmed into a perpetual state of lying in order to get by in the world. In fact, we are being programmed to believe that lying is the way to achieve success and higher status in society. The most manipulative people are in turn the most manipulatable. Evil forces and agendas are working in this world every hour of every day to exert control over our thoughts, over our behavior, and our choices. It's my belief that these agendas are behind the fervent push to normalize the narcissistic behavior that we see all over the mainstream culture, and in order to guarantee their control over the minds of all people who fall into this trap of normative narcissism. When people are so fearful of maintaining their self-image that they will abandon truth in order to ensure that they get ahead, there really is no level to which they cannot be manipulated to go along with what can be passed off in the world as good and true. When in reality, those things are actually truly evil. As I said, we have really yet to see the full extent of the control mechanisms that are being built around us, but they are coming, and if we don't take up the work of self-examination in order to keep our minds on guard from these mechanisms of control, we will open ourselves up to great danger. We are already there in many respects. Now, this video is the first, really, an introduction in a series that we will continue with regarding narcissism and the means of control that are exerted through exploiting people's fears. As with many of the issues that we discuss here, the way out of this trap is to tell ourselves the real truth and live in the light of that confession brings. Even the most beautifully idealized version of ourselves is very likely a lie that's born out of a fear that we really are all truthfully selfish and sinful people who would rather deceive the world as opposed to face the truth of our own depravity. In the book People of the Lie, Dr. M. Scott Peck writes, "Evil is not committed by people who feel uncertain about their righteousness, who question their own motives, or who worry about betraying themselves. The evil in this world is committed by the spiritual fat cats, by the Pharisees of our own day, the self-righteous who think they are without sin because they are unwilling to suffer the discomfort of significant self-examination." So, until next week, let that be a call to stay diligent and stay vigilant, keeping your minds on guard.